Joining me now on the Knicks Film School Podcast, he's a returning guest, although I feel like it's been a while since I don't even remember what was going on in Knicks land when we last spoke. I was probably last offseason. In any case, he's had a busy time since then, running one of the more successful franchises in Major League Soccer here in America, the Nashville franchise. They have grown up from their nascent expansion roots, now in the midst of their third season as a part of the MLS. The GM of the Nashville Soccer Club, Mike Jacobs. Hello, Mike.
Jonathan, how are you?
I'm doing great. I have to admit this to our listeners because it would be disingenuous of me not to. I asked you when we were chatting off air, I'm like, so when does the new season start? And you're like, yeah, we're actually 6 games in. I had absolutely no idea because I've been so caught up with the Knicks the last few weeks. I haven't even thought to check up to see if you guys were, in fact, starting a new season. And you have, and you're 3 wins, 2 losses and a draw. So not too bad so far.
Yeah, as we were talking about earlier, with a Winter World Cup this year, with the World Cup being in Qatar or Qatar, depending how you pronounce it, we had the shortest offseason in league history because we're going to end our season earlier. So there's no conflict with the World Cup. And, I think because of that, it's kind of funny too. You think about how quickly things have moved for us this offseason. Last year, I think I saw 5 Knicks games live. Yeah. At home or on the road. This year, I didn't go to 1 game live. So I think I watched, 76 of them live on either MSG Go or NBA League Pass. But, just with such a short offseason, it was hard to kind of sync up.
Because, I remember tracking your season, and then obviously you guys made it into the playoffs, second year in a row making it to the conference semifinals. And correct me if I'm wrong, second year in a row losing on penalty kicks, right?
Well, we lost in overtime the first year, but
okay.
Both games are very similar, opposed to losing in penalty kicks this last year to Philadelphia.
But I guess it's the effect of the basketball season. It really kind of takes me out of the rest of life for a period of time. But it really does seem like yesterday. And now, so your off season, couldn't have been more than 3 or 4 months, something like that?
It was less than that. It was probably like 6-8 weeks.
What did you rest at all? What was that like for you?
Well, it's ironic because you think of the idea of the off season and people getting away. When it comes to the general manager, look, the Knickerbockers have a president of basketball operations, which is probably a similar job description to mine. That's usually the busiest time of the year. So for us, I think the best chance kind of to decompress a little bit is once the season starts, because it's kind of more 9 to 5, where the traditional off season is our busiest time of the year.
Okay. And this was even more compressed than usual. And the other thing, which is notable, which we were also just talking about off air, is that you are about to open a new stadium, except it was not ready yet for the start of the season. And so you are about to play your 7th consecutive road game to begin the year. Did I get that right?
That's correct. Yeah, we were talking earlier about it being like the equivalent of the San Antonio Spurs rodeo road trip. I think there's only been 7 teams in MLS history that have started the season with 8+ road games.
But at the same time, you must be excited to open the new arena.
Oh, it's awesome. I use this analogy. I actually stole it from Shane Battier. He was involved in a staff retreat we had a couple of years ago, and then we did some sharing of best practices. He finished his playing career and was working with the Heat as their director of strategy and analytics. And we had synced up our scouting and analytics departments with the Heat's scouting and analytics departments. So it was awesome from the standpoint of sharing case studies and best practices. And, he used the idea of using analytics. He used the analogy of being like card counters in the casino. So, for us, we look at that in the last 7 years in MLS, how many points you need to qualify for the playoffs. Yep. In our sport, you get 3 points for a win, 1 point for a tie. And, with us having to play our first 8 games of the season all on the road, where it's challenging, we've got a good idea of what we have to do to qualify for the playoffs. Like how many points we need to get through those first 8 games.
Sure.
And the reality is, in a 34-game season, 17 home, 17 away, by the time we open our new stadium in 2 weeks, we would have played half our road games already.
So again, you guys are in 7th place right now, which there's, for anybody who doesn't know, there's 14 teams in both conferences, right? I know there's 14 teams in your conference. And you guys are holding strong in 7th place. You have to feel pretty good about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think sometimes when it comes to looking at the standings, it's probably in all sports also, it's still a little early to be looking at them. I mean, we sit in, I think, 7th in the standings, or 6th in the standings, but we're only 3 points, which is 1 win out of first place. So it's still kind of early, but when you see what we've done in our first 6 games, on the road, winning 3 of them, in MLS, it has the most significant home field advantage of any league in the world.
Really?
The away team only wins 25% of the time. So, thinking about, the fact that we have 3 wins out of our first 6, there were 6 teams MLS last year that won less than 3 road games the whole season.
Wow.
There were 6 more that won just 3 games the whole season. So, that's almost half the teams in our league won 3 or less road games the whole season last year. And we've done it in 6 games.
So you brought up last season. I'm happy you did, because I want to talk about that a little bit. So you, again, for anybody who doesn't know, you guys were an expansion club in 2020. The club had been around in a different league for a couple of years, but first year in MLS. And would it be fair to say you surprised some folks by making the second round of the playoffs?
Absolutely. Look, in all sports, I'm trying to think the last time there was an expansion team in the NBA. I mean, like the Vancouver Grizzlies.
I want to say, but then there was the Hornets came back because they had moved. So maybe it was they were the Bobcats for I think that was one of them.
But most expansion teams in all sports not only fail miserably, they usually like hemorrhage goals or points defensively. So for us to have, to gone to the playoffs in our first year and to have, won 2 different playoff games, to last year, we were the first team in MLS history to win games in both of our first 2 seasons in the playoffs.
So you have this kind of out of nowhere, very surprising year in your first year. Last year, I think people were a little bit more obviously aware of you guys. And I was going back before and looking at some of the preseason predictions in MLS before the 2021 season. And you were definitely on the radar. How cognizant were you going into last season of a possible letdown, or like we had exceeded expectations in this first year? Now, how do I make sure that we don't fall off in year 2?
I think it's natural when you think of after you have any level of success. Like you think about the patron saint of team building, Pat Riley. He used to always talk about the idea of the disease of more. That once you have success, whether it's players wanting more money, more playing time, players or staff larger roles. So for us, I think we try to make sure as much as we could that we're able to keep the group humble enough that they appreciated that where we had great success for a first year team. In the full scheme of things, we really hadn't accomplished that much. So we're pretty humble to the standpoint that maybe we're doing well for a first year team or second year team. For us to continue to kind of ascend among the top teams in our league, we still kind of have a ways to go.
And is that something that you need to make sure everybody in the organization understands that mentality to guard against whether you want to call it the disease of more, whatever it is? And if so, I imagine that's probably not the easiest thing to do, because there's a lot of people involved in a soccer organization.
Yeah, look at the idea of managing expectations. It's not only for our players and staff, but to that point, fans, media, maybe ownership. It's we talk a lot. During the course of the year, you and I mean, following Knickerbockers is like my guilty pleasure, and it's a way for me to help kind of decompress from what I'm doing. But what's really ironic about that is as I've kind of grown and evolved into what I'm doing for a living, I mean, what is my passion also is something I do every day. So it's hard to not look at what I'm doing and then try to mirror that or associate that with what's happening or not happening at the Garden. And, I think, especially when you look at what happened from the season prior to the one that just ended for the Knicks. I mean, obviously, it's hard to maintain expectations, but I think not only to maintain it on the court, but I think that process of managing it off the court, whether it's Tibbs in a locker room or Leon and his staff, with their staff, with fans, media, there's challenges, obviously.
So it's funny you bring up challenges and Tom Thibodeau in the same sentence. I feel like we haven't had we talk a lot offline. I feel like we haven't had a ton of conversations about Tibbs other than just the normal, maybe surprised he went in this direction or that direction. Before I ask you a more specific question, what are your thoughts generally about Tom Thibodeau? Are you high on him? Are you low on him? Where are you?
So I would tell you, in general, I'm a big Tibbs fan. I have a sign hanging in my office that says, we don't lose, we either win or we learn. Yeah, the year before he had gotten the job with the Knickerbockers, I heard him speak at Sloan at the Sports Analytics Conference, and was really blown away. And I was excited when he was on the panel, just from the standpoint that I was a fan of his teams in Chicago and the way his teams played, and to think of someone who's described as old school and to have him on a panel talking about sports analytics, I appreciate the fact that he talked about maybe how he's evolved as a coach and how he'd use that more. Looking at things like plus minus, you think about in our sport. I think about like hoops, like it's my sport, but like
it's all of our sport.
Yeah, for sure. But but you look at like basketball and you think so much of it is the combinations of players who play together, the rotation of players you use together. I think, especially last year when the team had done so well, he showed a penchant like for making tough decisions, and whether it was sitting RJ in the fourth quarter or giving IQ some run in his rookie year, in crunch time. I think he laid a great foundation in his first year. What I will say is I do think there are challenges sometimes, and I see it like in my own job, my own sport, to relating to what I do to what happens to the Knicks or the NBA. You have to understand, I think coaches are very short term in their thought process. Coaches are thinking to themselves, I have to win right now and keep my job. Where a general manager or a president of basketball operations, they're thinking, I want to be, they're thinking sustained success.
Sure.
They're thinking, I have to win today, but I have to win the rest of the season, next year, 5 years from now. And, I think about like, the challenge that Tibbs appears to have maybe of playing young players. I think you can look at that, but you can also see, RJ in season 2, when he was like in the top 5 in the league in minutes played.
Yeah, he was up there.
Yeah, so I think it's hard to, you can't take either or. Either he doesn't play the kids or he does, but it depends which ones he is. I can absolutely appreciate, down the stretch, I think, if you're not winning, you have to play your young players to build your asset war chest up, to either build their stock to move them on, or to give them an opportunity to see what you have to use them going forward. Maybe we didn't always see that, at times when
we did not.
We did it. I'm trying to be polite.
I was about to say I could be. And I listen. I've been the one who's been defending Tibbs all year, but I was looking it up at like 82 game season. Emmanuel Quickly, I think, played. He was available for over 70 of those games. To have 3 starts, and not that starting is everything, but like you look at that number and you look at Obi, obviously only got in the starting lineup after Randall went down. I think maybe that's kind of what you're angling towards. Like you would have liked to see a little bit more of those sorts of numbers go up. Yeah. Whenever I talk with my buddies and reference like per 36 minutes, in regards to OB or IQ, and that was OB most of the year was talking about his per 36. And you were always great posting stuff about, especially earlier in the year, like where his per 36 matched up with guys like Giannis and Anthony Davis early in the season, like my brother's response or his buddy's response will always be like, rather than his per 36, why don't they just play him 36 minutes? And it's funny. I was looking up some stats. All I did was look up stats. If you look at the NBA's just total plus minus on the year, and there are 3 players in the top 100 in that stat on teams that did not make either the play-in or the playoffs. And they're all Knicks. And there's Emmanuel Quickly and I think he's 35th, Obi Toppin 76th, and then interestingly enough, Alec Burks, who's I think somewhere in the 90s. So the thing that's so interesting, and I think what infuriated a lot of fans, is that it's not just, well, the season's not going in the direction we think it should be. Or many people thought it should be going. Let's play the kids for that reason. There's evidence to say that these kids are actually going to help you win more games. So like if you have a coach who has these tendencies, clearly, like it's very obvious, especially down the stretch of games. How could you imagine trying to handle that from a front office perspective? Like, or is that something that should have been figured out before you hired the man in the first place? How would you handle this? Well, that's what's hard too, because it certainly looked like when Tibbs was hired that he was, clearly selected by a president of basketball operations that had a tie with him. They certainly seemed aligned
on and off the court. And, that is important because if you don't have that, it's just not going to work, and whether it's in selection of players you're bringing in, players are jettisoning, moving out, there's got to be an alignment where you're on the same page. And, when you read comments or when you see rotations and it maybe doesn't, whether it's, young players not being used, that as fans, we think are going to be the nucleus of the team, whether it's players that are added in the offseason and they aren't integrated in the rotation,
or in midseason, like Cam Reddish.
Or in midseason. Yeah. You have to wonder about how aligned that is. And, I would say, I think it's very common in sport for those two positions not to be aligned. I think it's very common in sport for a head coach to walk in and find out that a new player was acquired or a player in his team was traded. What I will tell you, though, I think as often as that happens, it normally happens to teams that don't do well. The teams that do really well, you have that alignment where you kind of see that it's not just buy-in, that the coach and the GM communicate very regularly, that they're on the same page, that decisions are made, that they're doing it together. We always talk about the fact that our head coach, Gary Smith, where he might necessarily be able to pick the players that he wants all the time, he has ultimately kind of like a veto power that, like, I'd say power, but like our relationship, I'm just not going to acquire a player that he's not on board with.
So can I ask you about that a little more specifically? Because what we've been led to believe from the reporting, at least about the Knicks, is that Leon Rose at least endeavored to have a sort of setup where all of the voices in the room, like they had legitimate say, and he would listen to everybody, and then those opinions would coalesce towards one thing. If there comes a point where there is a significant disagreement, like let's say your coach is like, no, I really don't want this guy. Like, what happens if like your entire front office or most of your front office is really on the same page and like we feel this is a really good opportunity? Like, has that happened, or what do you think you might do if that happens?
So our CEO, Ian Ayre, before he was here years ago, he actually ran Liverpool. One of the biggest clubs in the world. When he was at Liverpool, it was coined in the media there. They had a transfer committee. Because in soccer or football, you can buy and sell players, and the idea was it wasn't one person with his finger on the button. It was kind of a committee that worked together. And I don't know, that's different than in most sports. But I think again, the ones that work really well together, I think work in that setting. And for us, maybe like, I don't know, like literally like a round table, like King Arthur. But like, if you look at our table, I surround myself, my assistant general manager, Ali Mackay, is a former agent.
Okay.
My director of player personnel, Chance Myers, is a former player in the league.
Okay.
Our director of strategy analytics used to work for the largest, data collection company, like in our sport, Opta. And then I have our head coach, Gary Smith, and our CEO, Ian Ayre. And, if we're going to acquire a player, we will kick it around. And, to your point, I think it's our responsibility to demonstrate to the coach that this player provides value. Okay. I think I think the worst thing you can do is to ignore what your coach is saying. I say this to these guys all the time, like, listen to our coach. And I'm not saying do what he says. What I'm saying is listen to the things he's telling us. He's putting down breadcrumbs. To acquire a player that he is not going to play, you create a huge problem for your organization. And at that point, if you're not aligned, something has to change. And it's either the player, the coach, or the decision makers.
And I just, as we've kind of gone now from a very successful Knicks season to a less successful one, it's interesting to me that, like, we heard reporting that there were disagreements during the first season about, going to acquire certain free agents, and they didn't, and they went in a different direction. It feels like when winning is happening, it smooths over a lot of those sorts of, ruffling of feathers. But I feel like when the losses start, that's when your organizational mettle gets tested. And to me, I want to hear from you. What did this season potentially reveal to you about what may or may not be happening, behind the scenes in terms of how they're running things?
Well, it's hard. It's hard to express a little bit because look like you. If you look at me, I think my day, my sun rises and sets by how the Knicks do, and obviously it's like I always say about like our fans here. I want to be like the Knicks or the Yankees here in Nashville. I want our fans to be passionate, and I want them to care about our team desperately. But sometimes when you have that, sometimes you're more emotional and less analytical, so it's hard to kind of separate that. And, I'm not at practice every day, and I'm not in the locker room. So it's hard for me to say like what's happening on a day-to-day basis. But, when you see, well, not even when you see, when you hear reports about after the fact, maybe not being totally on board with Kemba Walker, not being totally on board with Cam Reddish, you have to step back and wonder like where that disconnect is, because again, I think acquiring players where everyone's not on board, it causes a lot of problems because, one from a cap standpoint, it's not unlimited. At a certain point, you just can't, between roster spots and cap space you have, you just can't acquire 30 guys. So the idea of acquiring players that are going to be used, I think if not doing it, you're wasting not only opportunities for your team, but you're wasting valued money in cap space.
Yeah. And it's, it's interesting you bring up cap space because obviously the Knicks had a fair amount to work with in the preseason, and they ended up kind of trying to, I think, split the baby between continuity, bringing back certain guys, and also addressing needs. Which is why I find it interesting that the Kemba thing. Like I remember when Kemba got signed, you were just like everybody else. Like you were excited, I was excited
for sure.
We were going back. Like if you make a move that you're pretty sure, like I don't know, has this happened to you where you've made a move where you're like, this is definitely going to work, I feel really good about this one, and then it starts going in a certain direction? Like how do you feel like a responsibility to give it a certain amount of time, or like how do you handle something like that when a best laid plans go wrong?
Well, one thing our director of strategy analytics always talks about is like sample size. Like is it a large enough sample size to determine whether it's working or not? Part of me thinks whether Kemba was going to perform well or not. I think one of the biggest challenges was D Rose getting hurt. Not did we rely on him so heavily, but you think about the amount of minutes that he was going to play and the minutes Kemba was going to play in general. I mean, I think acquiring a player like Kemba with injury history, I think there were always going to be questions there. I think from a defensive standpoint, whether he was a liability or not, looking at what Tibbs looks for in a player. Sure. I mean, I think, there probably was a small group of people probably who weren't unhappy to see Elf leave. So you think about like, the alternative. I mean, certainly on paper, you thought it'd be no worse than that. Yeah. But how long do you go before the experiment is a failed experiment? I don't know. I mean, part of me thinks that, again, I think D Rose getting injured, if he was healthy, would it have masked some of those things? Would it have given Kemba a longer rope? I mean, the reality is, I think we're still not totally sure about what IQ is, whether he's a lead guard, a point guard, a combo guard, whether he is the guy, but it certainly seems like, moving away from Kemba with D Rose injured, whether Alec Burks made the most sense, whether it was going with an unproven rookie in Miles McBride, like the contingency plan, the lack of parachute if Kemba didn't work. Yeah. I think once D Rose got hurt, I think it really put us in a hard spot,
It's like have you ever gone skydiving?
I have not.
I have not either. I will not either. That is one of it's like I'm leading a very happy life. I'm not going to jump out of a plane, but it's like you have the parachute and then the backup parachute. Except it feels like they're back whatever you wear when you go skydiving. It's like it was neither of the two chutes were like checked for fail safes. But again, that's something that they should have perhaps thought of, and they didn't. You brought up IQ. I want to get back to him in a second. First, I want to pick your brain about the trade deadline. So I waited until I brought this up. Of all of your great career accomplishments, I have to think very near the top is your name appearing on the recent athletic survey of an anonymous GM survey, right? In which you were not only named one of the most difficult or toughest negotiators in the sport as GM, but also one of the most difficult to work with. I'm wondering which of those two you're prouder of.
I mean, I guess you never want to have it where the opposing clubs think that you're going to, just give valuable assets away. To me, I think they're probably similar questions. I I always look at it like you hear stories about as you're closer to draft day that like when Danny Ainge was at the Celtics or, Pat Riley, when they called, they don't want to pick up. And, I'd like to think that, on draft day that people see me calling, that maybe that they would not be as quick to pick up or reluctant to do a deal with us. I want to have a good relationship with the other team's clubs. The reality is, other than when your two teams play each other on game day, I mean, like we all have to work together. But sure. I like to think that people would think that I'm pretty thoughtful about what we're going to do, and that we're pretty diligent about like kicking the tires on things as far as looking at different players or different deals.
I mean, I think the proof is in the pudding, which is obviously you're very good at your job. The record speaks for itself. I'm just curious because so clearly you are a very good negotiator with both trades, and I'm sure with agents and everything. This trade deadline, again, I remember we were talking before it. We were talking about the possibilities, and the Knicks ended up, putting the Cam thing aside, kind of sitting on their hands. When you are, whether it's in free agency or ahead of trade deadline or anything like that, when you kind of have an idea of what you need or what you really want, how tough can it be to balance like, man, I know this would be best for our club with going overboard and run the risk of essentially, doing nothing and maybe hurting yourself more in that way?
So two pieces of advice that might come to each other a little bit that I got when I first got into this business was, one was from a mentor that like, if you know the player you need for your team, regardless of market value, regardless of what assets you have, exhaust what you have to do to get that player, because if it works out, no one will care like what you spent to get them. Sure. The challenge along with that, I think it goes part and parcel with that to me is you never want to be in a situation where you can't walk away from a trade. You never want to be in a situation where you're so deep and so far in that now you're taking advantage of. And, look, we talked about a couple of those deals. I think one of the hardest ones I was talking with a buddy this morning about was, when you look at what happened with Mitch.
Well, we've been talking a lot about that.
Yeah, what I would say is, and every team is different. So, and I'd say also it's not as easy as this, but when I think about like best practices, we spend a lot of time trying to do case studies. And look, I've told you sometimes it's take your newsletter and I forward to my staff. Just yesterday I was texting with two guys who I lead on in the league, Zach Kleiman from Memphis,
okay. Sure.
And RC Buford with San Antonio, and wishing both of them good luck. I said, since my team is out, rooting for your teams now, But, a lot of times we'll look at things that different teams do, not only in our sport, but we're the only salary cap league in the world for soccer. So I spend just as much time looking at the Spurs and Grizzlies, the Patriots and Devil Rays, as I do like Real Madrid or Barcelona. And, I think you look at these case studies and then it helps you maybe looking at either what one team does well, maybe learning what not to do to kind of come up with best practices. And, where it is different for each player, each sport, I kind of feel like once you get into 18 months left on a player's contract, you have to either put them in a new deal, okay, because in 6 months' time, they're in their last year. And, other than maybe someone trying to strengthen up their team for a playoff chase, you probably be able to get good value for a player in the last year of their deal.
Sure.
So you're either going to put them in a new deal, you're either going to trade them and get assets for them before they hit that, that inside 18 months, or you kind of just have this come to Jesus as a staff and say, look, maybe it's better for us to keep this player on our roster and just kind of keep him through the duration of his contract and let them walk.
No, sorry. Continue.
Look, you saw the Spurs last year. I remember talking to RC, around that same time, the year prior with Aldridge and DeRozan, what they were going to do. And, they held on to DeRozan, and they, mutually terminated with Aldridge. For me, I think, and again, I'm not in the offices with Leon and his staff, but like the one for me, I kind of felt like, the shoe that was going to drop was Mitch because, even at the deadline, he was only 6 months away from his deal expiring. I just didn't know if it was too late at that point, at the deadline, but I also kind of felt if you don't do something at the deadline, he's probably going to walk.
The biggest what if of the season for me easily, maybe not what if, the biggest question, if I could get Leon Rose in a room and give him truth serum, is what was the best deal on the table for Robinson? Or maybe there was no real deal on the table, right? I mean, I actually, while I have you on, we hear all the time about like teams talk, right? Teams talk, but no firm offer or whatever, was ever made, like, how easy is it to get a sense of like what you could get for your player or like what another player is like? Does that get out of the way early? And then it just comes down to like, all right, we know this is there. If we want it, we could revisit it if we need to.
Yeah, like I mentioned, other than the day that teams play each other, that in every sport, the GMs have to work together. And, what I would say is most trades that develop, I'm trying to think, let's say that the Cam Reddish trade, that wasn't like one day Leon picked the phone up and it happened. My guess is it was days, weeks, maybe months in the making before that. So I think very rare does it just happen like on a whim, like maybe you see in a movie where someone picks the phone up, makes a call, and the trade just happens. I think
like draft day.
I think it's like a campy Disney-esque type story. I think that's great, but I think the reality is it probably doesn't happen very often.
Okay.
Even like when myself or my assistant GM travel, a lot of times it's connecting with the other team staff and maybe it's kicking the tires on players, sharing interest in players. We had acquired a player, before our first season as an expansion team in 2020, Walker Zimmerman, and he's captain the U.S. national team, and he's been the MLS Defender of the Year the past 2 years. And where it didn't just happen overnight, and we weren't calling every day. I would say every 3 or 4 months at different times when I had spoken to their staff, made it clear that hey, if you ever looking to move him at some point, we'd be a very willing taker. Do
you have to guard against? Like being the high school boy who wants to go out with the girl, the prettiest girl in school, being too overeager, I guess.
Yeah, I think you have to be careful about that. I think you also be cautious about that player's agent finding out or the player finding out. Sometimes it's just kicking the tires, someone's having a conversation, but it could turn into, hey, I heard you looking at moving my player. Okay. Or a player knocking the door. Hey, I heard you looking at shopping me. You're looking at trading me. When that totally isn't the case, so I think, you have to kind of separate, what's fact and what's fiction. And, I think it's interesting because, the reality is, what was on the table, we can all come up with fantastic, like fantasy type trades.
Yeah.
I feel like, we kicked the Aaron Fox around ad nauseum, and ended up not moving him in Sacramento. So, who knows if he ever was even on the table at all.
Sure.
It's very possible it was all fantasy basketball type stuff that we were kicking around and it was never realistic.
Well, the name that was being kicked around in association with the Aaron Fox is a name that is still being kicked around. Julius Randle. Just to even take off your GM hat for a second. Can you ever remember something like this happening to a professional athlete coming off of a year that he had last year? Because I've been racking my brain. I can't think of one. And I know you're as much of a sports historian as I am.
Yeah, it's hard. And, a lot of times you think you take the GM hat off, but, you always hear about how motivated a player is in like the last year of a contract, trying to prove themselves, and where Julius maybe wasn't in the last year of his deal. I get asked by friends a lot, like when the season started, how much did Julius' performance, how much was that affected by getting a new deal? It's hard to say. I don't know Julius, other than just watching him on TV and looking at his body language, I've a
Does that
time.
Stuff matter to you? Like, I obviously it matters to you as a Knicks fan, but like when, do you pay attention to that stuff when you're looking at your own team? Like, or are you, cause like, I think some fans think like, oh, well, Leon Rose isn't paying attention to Julius slumping his shoulders. And like, I'm kind of like, you know what? I think he is.
I can't believe that anyone in that role wouldn't do that.
Okay.
It's not a popularity contest. I don't think you're doing things just because fans say they want this, but ultimately you're trying to put together a team that's going to make your fans happy. In most cases, and especially in New York, it's a team that's been built over the years, the most successful teams around a hardworking, gritty, grinded out type players, and I think Julius embodied that last season.
He did.
And I think, I think the reason why fans cheer for guys like Obi, and like IQ, it's just, yes, Obi will do in-game dunks. We haven't seen, I'm not sure I've ever seen a player do in-game dunks like that before. I mentioned Vince Carter the other day. I don't think I've ever seen Vince Carter put a ball through his legs during a game doing that.
Not in the best Vince one I remember was a dunk on Mourning when I think he was with the Nets, if I recall correctly. But anyway, Obi pulls some out. Yeah.
But I also think I think as much as he does exciting things, I think it's his energy and enthusiasm, how hard he plays.
Yep.
I think his body language, I think it's endearing. I think, look, we all love, Rowan Aaron Barrett Jr. I think not only is he like a super kid, but again, his body language, he looks like he's really engaged, and also how hard he plays. I mean, he goes to the rack so hard. I think, he takes players on, and I think you appreciate that. And, those are things that, independent of how many points you score, lights just went off, motion light.
It's okay. I can still see you all right.
I think as much as, we like that he's scoring 20 plus points per game, I think a large part of it is how hard he plays and his attitude and effort. And, I think I can't imagine that Julius wasn't frustrated by, sure, either what he's hearing, what he's reading, what he's seeing. But there's no question that those things, whether it's a coach, whether it's a front office staff, those things matter.
You've been amazing with your time. I promised myself I wasn't going to keep you for too long, but I have to hit on a couple more. So you mentioned your RJ. He's eligible this summer for what could be a max extension. A lot of money. Hasn't played like a max player yet, but you can. I think there are opinions out there like he will grow into that. There are opinions he'll grow maybe to be just shy of that. When he is arguably the best thing you have going as a franchise right now, and it seems like all parties are on good terms. He says he loves being a Knicks, says he loves playing in New York, the whole thing. How careful do you need to be, do you think, if you're Leon Rose of, again, I'll ask Mr. Tough Negotiator, how do you handle this? Because you want to keep him. How important is it basically to keep him happy, or does it just, do you not worry about that and you just have to do what's best for your team? I don't, how would you approach that?
Well, I like the idea of using comps in a negotiation. And, we talk about this a lot from an analytics standpoint. Also, sometimes comps can be dangerous, like comparisons, because it works for one player doesn't mean it works for somebody else. I think comparing players, how their style of play, I think it can create a reference point, like in scouting. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I'll say, who does this guy remind you of? Sure. And I don't necessarily think a comp means I'm saying this player is as good as, we'll talk about IQ, I know, but early on I said if his floor was Lou Williams, and his ceiling was Trae Young, I think we'd all be doing like handstands, and cartwheels. So, but I'm not necessarily saying he'll be as good as either of those players, but the role he's used in and how he plays, maybe that's how I would use that. I like using data analytics in negotiations because it's like objective versus subjective.
Sure.
You have your opinion, then you have fact. And I think for me, when you look at other players, and look, you do a good job of that too, and I know you wrote about it recently. I think when you look at comps of other players his age, when they've gotten that extension, to me, I think it's hard to make an argument when you have that and you're armed with that kind of information. It's hard for an agent to say, yeah, I get that, but he wants this. Every player wants a max contract. Every player wants to be special, but you have to be realistic about market value. And, I think RJ's demonstrated clearly that he deserves to have an extension. I think there are good comps out there for players at similar ages and similar statistical production. And I think for the future of the franchise, I think, he's someone who needs to be tied up. What I would say, so this is our third season in Major League Soccer. And in year one, we set up a roster where, we have 30 players on roster. I think half of those players we didn't have guaranteed for more than 1 year. And we had club options. In the NBA, you have player options. That would drive me insane to know that the idea of the uncertainty come back. I just, you have to pry that kind of option for me to give it to somebody. I had to my cold dead hands before I gave someone a player option. But
see, this is why you're a tough negotiator.
Yeah. But what I would say is, so year one, we kind of, as most Spanish teams don't do well, we expected to not to fail, but we expected that, most of the players we had to not fit, not work.
Okay.
We wanted to be in a situation where if it didn't work, we could blow it up and we could, we'd only have 15 players guaranteed rather than the whole group. Going in the, year one, we did fairly well and we brought most of that group back. But, about halfway through season two, once we knew that we had a nucleus of guys we could build around, we then tried to tie the nucleus of that group up long term. And you can look at that sometimes as saying, well, you're tying a lot of your cap space up. To me, I think from an asset management standpoint, once you have those players tied up in long-term deals, I guess in theory that they're, especially looking at the NBA, they're actually easier to trade, knowing that now that the club that acquires them can control that asset. The Julius deal, whether people liked it or not, when you look at how much money he was making this year compared to players who were all-stars last year, like the same all-star game he played in.
He's the 50th highest paid player in the league. And, it's the one that I've been thinking a lot about, especially since I don't know if you realize this, Evan Fournier, since I saw this today, blew my mind. Since January 1st, most 3-pointers in basketball. Now, that's a deal that was panned throughout the season. But that's a deal. If I'm a team that maybe doesn't get the top of the line free agents, I'm looking at that okay, it's $18 million a year. It's not nothing, but there's a team option. And it's that's a guy we can control.
See, for me, I look at it like that Julius deal where some people didn't like it. I thought, and look, he came off a great season last year, and whether he was going to achieve that again, I just thought it was a great deal because now they had this asset they could control and kind of, if they had to, move to get other assets. To me, I think just phrased a lot like having like an asset war chest. I think you want to be in a situation so your team doesn't do well. You get draft picks. You get other young assets. You play those young players, and they either help your team get better, or they're in a position where you can now move them to get other assets. When I look at this last trade deadline, one of my buddies, he always talks about I don't want Jalen Brunson. I want a megastar. A point guard. I don't want Julius or Obi. I want Zion Williamson. Which I'm thinking also 40 pounds ago Zion, not now. But what I said is you can't just say it's not fantasy league. You can't just pick players and have them come. You have to have enough assets in your war chest to acquire those players. And to me, I think even the idea of Fournier, whether he is the guy to start at the 2 in a really strong NBA team. For me, and I think it proved out that way, even with the bumps along the way, I think it proved out it was an upgrade from Bullock. Yeah. And I think whether he ends up being that guy or it's Grimes or Reddish or they acquire somebody else, I think a year later from where we're even after a playoff season at that 2 spot right now between Fournier, Grimes, Reddish, you think that Burks really is a 2. I think the Knicks have a larger war chest of players they could move to acquire other players. And I would say, even if it's not for the megastar, I think you keep acquiring assets. You look at
absolutely.
I don't think our roster looks significantly different than Brooklyn before they acquired KD and Kyrie. I do think one of the challenges, there's something I think that we'll all have the challenges with sometimes, is we're so emotionally involved in our team that I think sometimes that we rate the players we have better than maybe other teams might rate them.
For sure.
Yeah, you think at the time, the deal for Halliburton, in Sacramento acquires Sabonis. Yeah. I'm thinking how can they not take Julius? And but we don't even know if he was on a table. But also maybe we see Julius all the time, and maybe at that time, maybe we valued it maybe differently than Sacramento would in comparison to Sabonis.
Well, you bring up Julius again. I'd ask you one more about him because, again, you mentioned the body language stuff. You mentioned this, but at the same time, you mentioned this idea of this controllable asset, cost control. My podcast co-host Jeremy talks a lot about other teams don't necessarily view Julius Randle as negatively as Knicks fans do at this moment. Do you think that would you imagine Leon Rose and his group is approaching this offseason with the mentality of we need to move on from this player because he is detrimental to our larger goals as an organization? Or, as I suspect, do you think it's more like, this is an asset, we think he's worth this, we're not going to trade him unless we get back what we feel is commensurate value and more of a black and white way of looking at it?
We have a lot to unpack there, So let me take I'll try to hit them one at a time.
Sure.
I think the hard part for Tibbs and the relationship between Tibbs and Leon and his staff is the idea of developing assets. One of my worries about Julius as he started going long-term in the year is he can get devalued. To the point where if he doesn't play, so let's say the opposite. Let's say. And Tibbs obviously seemed to have, be very fond of Julius. But let's say Tibbs didn't want to play him. I could see a situation where the front office saying, look, hey, you need to keep playing this guy because we can't afford to have his stock go down. So that was a concern for me. I wanted to see more of Obi. I felt there's this dangerous game now, but how do we get Obi his minutes to see what he can do? Without devaluing Julius. So I think that's a challenge either way. And certainly it seemed like Tibbs wanted to keep using Julius. I think that the other piece about the asset and devaluing it is, maybe then you have the flip side and you have Leon and his staff say, hey, we need to play Obi more to see what we have there to either increase his value to move him on or to keep him and then move Julius on.
Maybe that's what happened late in the season. Potentially.
It makes sense. And again, I think that's one of those challenges with the coach who wants to win now and play who he thinks is his strongest team versus, being in rebuild mode and trying to play young kids. And I do think the challenge you have is that most front offices are thinking, how do we develop our assets to create this war chest for the offseason? Where I think you have most coaches probably thinking, if I'm doing this, I might not be here when these young guys are playing. I think about like the NFL coach who doesn't want a rookie quarterback. He wants a 30-year-old quarterback. He doesn't want to play the rookie kid who will make a lot of mistakes. And by the time he figures it out 3 years from now, that coach isn't there anymore.
But that goes back to what you were talking about before. I mean, you may not have said the word precisely, but doesn't that come to just trust? Like when you're all sitting around that table together, implicitly you trust each other. You trust that everybody's in it for one another, right?
Yeah, look, even when Tibbs first got hired, I remember thinking there was talk about how many years he would get. And, even when there was posturing or negotiation when he was finally signed, how many years guaranteed he'd get. Remember that? To me, and I kind of felt like when he got his deal, I'm like, great, this tells you these guys are all in and working together. Yeah. They buy in the fact to be a process. We talked about expectations early on. I mean, maybe they exceeded expectations so much in year one that maybe it moved the goalpost back a little further. Okay. For year two, sometimes maybe you have to go backwards a little to be able to go forwards again. That's not uncommon. Sure. But, I think the challenge that you have, you said it. I mean, there are questions there about trust. There's questions about buy-in and alignment between coaching staff and front office. But I think, the challenge now is as you look at this war chest, I think a challenge with Julius is, can you get fair market value for him? Has he devalued himself?
What is that?
It's a good question. And the point made before, maybe we also, as Knicks fans, have devalued him. Maybe he still has a higher value in other markets than we look at it. During the year, we talk about, IQ, and you write about him a lot, and Obi, RJ, Quentin Grimes to me, I think is a huge upside as a player. It's unfortunate he got injured. I think he's got a high ceiling. The question is, we watch these guys, and I'm assuming you're like me. I'm watching Summer League, and I'm trying to watch the Knicks games, as much as I can get anything. And I think do we overvalue these guys? I don't know, but to your point, you look at and stuff you put out there recently. Since the All-Star break, you look at minutes guys like Obi and IQ have played, and the results they put in those last several weeks. I don't know if it's a large enough sample size, but you could also make a case that it's no worse than what the other guys were doing.
For sure. Last one I want to ask you about quickly before I let you go. And you just kind of hit on some of the stuff with him, which is like, is it, beauty's in the eye of the beholder because he's our guy. We drafted him. Like we've seen the big shots and like he's not afraid of the moment. But there's it seems like at least real potential there for this guy to embody potentially a different role, a materially different role that he has now. And maybe whether it's a starting point guard or whatever it is, if you're running a team and you see a guy, it's like, okay, we might have something here. How do you go about planning around that, which is like the Knicks this offseason, like whether they're going to be in on Jalen Brunson or Malcolm Brogdon via trade or, Colin Sett, whoever, all these different point guards. But you also have this kid here who you're like, well, he might just be this. Like, how do you, that's basically your job, right? How do you like balance the what could be with also making sure there is a baseline with your organization about like that, you're doing right by them?
Well, I have to give my buddy Brian props. I told him I was going to mention his name because we kind of split because he wasn't all in an RJ early in the year when I was just banging his drum. And
you love RJ.
I do love RJ, and conversely, I was the same with IQ until the very end because I think there's stereotypes, there's preconceived biases that people have, and I think it's kind of ironic because we look at the coach that we have. And, before he was injured, his prized pupil in D Rose, I think ever since D Rose ascension when he first came in the league, it changed what we all think a point guard looks like.
Yes.
And, when you look at what Trae Young has done in Atlanta, as hard as it is to think about him, and obviously what he's meant as a villain to most of us, I think you see what IQ looks like. I think there are different shapes and sizes, figuratively and literally, I think about point guards. And, to me, for your question, I think like you have a game model. And I think that a coach says, this is how I want my team to play. What we do with our coach in our sport, my guess is probably similar in the NBA. We do a positional profile. This is what we think a player looks like in this coach's system. We look at what a player looks like technically, like how they play individually, how they pass, shoot, dribble, play defense, tactically, how they play their teammates. Maybe it's within the pick and roll, or maybe different things. I'm trying to think of basketball analogies. Athletically, like physically, then psychologically.
I'm just thinking, you as you're talking, I'm like, Tibbs definitely has a type for his point guards, which, as you said before, Kemba clearly didn't fit, but I guess maybe he was initially willing to make an exception there, and then that went awry. But I wonder how much of it, the quickly not starting part of it, is he doesn't fit maybe the archetype that Thibodeau and the organization has for like a quote unquote starting point guard. And like, do you have to adjust from that? If it's like, see, these are the questions I wonder if they're talking about these things behind the scenes.
Well, you look at Atlanta, right? When they made the trade in the draft to acquire Trae Young, I mean, they clearly had a plan in their mind of how their team was going to play.
Build all around him.
They got a pick and roll center who's a rim runner, okay, and also is a good shot blocker, maybe compensate for maybe Trae Young and taking chances on defense.
Yep.
They surrounded him with other shooters, right? I mean, other than Capella, there's never a time that Trae Young is on a court loaded with shooters.
Yep.
So to your point about like what happens with IQ, and as I mentioned, I mean, I've gone from being completely skeptical, seeing him as like a combo guard off the bench, fitting really well, like with D Rose, and not like with another more established point guard.
Sure.
So now thinking like, maybe we could give him the keys to the car, and let him kind of run things. And, when you see how Obi shot here down the stretch, RJ obviously slumped during the course of the year different times, but I think he's clearly shown he's a knockdown jump shooter, Fournier, as you mentioned, I mean, clearly can shoot it, as can Grimes. If you surrounded IQ with enough shooters, if you gave him a rim running pick and roll type center, like Mitch, like Noel before he got hurt, like
or Sims. Don't forget Sims,
who I'm also big on, what I would say is, I mean, I think there are pieces there, and they've demonstrated it by their performances down the stretch, that maybe we have pieces to take on an experiment like this. And I also feel like sometimes we think about like the offseason as the only time you can make trades. I mean, the trade deadline, it goes on well into the season, and I don't know that they have to make the point guard decision this offseason. I mean, I think they have to upgrade there. I think we've probably seen Kemba Walker play his last game for Knickerbockers.
I think you're more likely to suit up for the New York Knicks next season than Kemba Walker.
It'd be a great story to have D Rose come back. I just don't know physically what he'll be able to do in general. Yeah. But so I think there'll be some reinforcements in general. But I think having, you talk about maybe like what has to happen to make it, and this is a philosophical shift as far as like technically or tactically for your coach, if you're going to change how your team plays.
Yeah.
Because to your point, I mean, IQ is not the prototypical point guard in a Tom Thibodeau team, no. So maybe it's, I had this conversation with friends too, maybe it's acquiring someone like Jalen Brunson, who like IQ can play on the wing or holding the ball, can start him off the bench. Maybe it's having someone like that to balance the IQ experiment. And I think, saying about the positional profiles, we also talk about having an A and a B. So it's not just like a starter and reserve, maybe two different types of players each position. Because sometimes you mentioned like, game to game, certain combinations of players can change from a game to game basis,
For sure.
Maybe having a quicker point guard who's more downhill, and trying to get to the basket versus a guy who tends to be more of a spot up shooter as his alternate. I mean, for me, I would say, Jalen Brunson is probably a good advice for someone like IQ. And I think like worst case scenario, if the IQ experiment is extended into next season and given a chance to be a starting point guard, if for some reason we had to blow it up, at least there was a B, there's an alternate there.
Sure.
Whereas this past year, I mean, again, it was unfortunate D Rose got hurt, but I mean, with Kemba and D Rose being so similar age-wise, the minutes they can play, with IQ, I mean, at least on, I think to everybody, it's probably seemed to look like until the very end of the season, he really wasn't looked at kind of as a point guard or as a floor general. There really wasn't much of a plan B going into the season on paper. And I think, if you are going to go with IQ as your guy, that there's got to be enough of if he's your A, there's got to be a B to complement it in case it doesn't work.
Then have a backup plan. That seems like it's a pretty fundamental good thing to have as someone who runs a team. Mike, I could sit here and pick your brain for hours, but you have a soccer team to run. I would usually ask people at this stage of the podcast if they want to plug or promote anything. Can I do it for you? Go watch Nashville Soccer Club play soccer. Is that good?
That's good enough for me. I'll tell you what. I had a reporter ask me recently. He asked me what was the coolest thing that's happened to me since I've been a general manager of Major League Soccer. Okay. And I said, it has nothing to do with soccer. It's the coolest thing I got to do was to be on Knicks Film School Podcast. The fact that anyone want to talk to me about the Knickerbockers was awesome. So very genuinely, I can do this all day. Yeah.
We'll make this an annual thing. We'll and who knows, maybe when we do it next year, we'll have some happier season to reflect back on. You're absolutely amazing. I'll wish you the best of luck, but it doesn't seem like you need it because you guys just expansion team doesn't matter, win anyway, second year team. I mean, it's amazing to see you from afar. I think I told you I'm going to be in Nashville this summer. I'm going to try to either get to a game or at least meet up with you or something. It'll be my first time. So maybe you could give me a little tour.
Done deal for sure.
All right. This was great. Thanks so much for your time, Mike.
Thanks, Jonathan. Appreciate it.